All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of News on China Inside the Headlines.
Yeah.
This is our fifth episode, and it's the 109th time we've renamed
I think it's becoming
because
a brand. We change name every week. I think it's
Like we
fun.
can do
that's
all the
that's
ways: inside,
that's
above, around, under.
yeah. Well, so I found out that my good friend Dan Cohen, he's already got a new show that's called Behind the Headlines. So we're changing ours for now to inside the headlines. Take that, Dan. Inside, seeing everything from the inside is way better than just looking from behind. So I think we've got a better name now. So thank you for that, Dan. I was annoyed at
Thanks,
first, but
Dan.
now I'm yeah. All right, no. So yeah, we're at episode 5. How are you guys doing? First of all,
Doing great.
Doing great.
No pina
yeah,
coladas to tell of, but we're doing
Yeah.
still okay despite all that.
and I don't know if it's the same there, but all of a sudden became cold these last few days. The temperature dropped really low, at least here. I don't know if it's the same
Oh,
up in Shanghai,
it's cold.
or it's more or less the same. It's just always
For
cold.
Brazilian standards.
Yeah, it's always cold for Brazil.
All right, so now we are for your episode over on your channel, which everybody obviously should check out. You are on News on China episode 43, number 43, right? So you do, in case anybody's joining for the first time, you do 60-second summaries of the headlines and some of the most interesting or biggest headlines. And then what we do over on my channel is we just have a casual discussion about it. So let's start, first of all, with the video. I'll load that up now. All right, there we go. Great video as always. So for inside the headlines, what do we want to go into first? What do you guys want to chat about first?
Well, actually, one of the first points, thanks for doing a little promo for our YouTube channel. One of the things is that we also do a weekly digest. So if anyone wants to do more reading, we take the best top 10 stories. So the video only covers 4, but people can check that out on dongshengnews.org. And also we're on Twitter now. Young on Twitter, very fresh still, Dongsheng News as well. So you'll catch more of these headlines in other forms and other channels.
Yeah, and you've got a few other specialty sections also. One specifically focusing on China-Africa relations, which is a pretty important topic these days. And all of those links everybody can find down in the description of the video afterwards.
Yeah, this is actually a digest that the China Africa. It's another digest that we publish on Friday. So the global now digest is Saturday, but the Africa China is on Friday. So it's also,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
So going inside the headlines. All right, just to give us a little context, just getting used to it, comfortable with the inside the headlines.
It'll change next week again to something else.
Yeah, that's okay.
You know,
we're just like, I think we're doing an encirclement strategy around the headlines. You know, above, under, around, inside.
Yeah.
All right, so we won't go too much into it, but just to set the context of the meteor stuff we want to get into was the Quad country virtual meeting that happened, I guess, about 10 days ago now. So that's Australia, India, Japan, and the US. So their heads of states met. One of the things that came out, even though China was not explicitly named ever, but it was very clear that this alliance is trying to further the course that the previous U.S. administrations have done, but that that Biden will clearly continue to maintain, and I quote, the U.S. primacy in the region. And they've named several things around what to pay attention for around the technological development led by China in this region. So from everything of telecoms, what we've been seeing for Huawei, ZTE, and also artificial intelligence, biogenetics, so that kind of top tier state of the art technology and what they call the critical supply chains. One thing that came out, I guess, more concretely, but still a promise, is that these Quad countries have promised 1 billion vaccines until the end of 2022. Let's see if they're able to fulfill that. I think one of the interesting things for these Quad countries coming together in this anti-China alliance is that all 4 countries actually have China as their biggest trading partner. So this is going to be quite interesting for them of how they move forward. You know, looking back at 2020, Japan and Australia both had China as their largest trading partner, but also their largest export market. So Japan, 20% of their exports go to China. Australia, despite all the trade war and sanctions, it's 30% of total trade and 40% of its exports. And we know, you know, Australia probably of all the countries have lost a huge amount in this anti-China sort of strategy. At least $3 billion worth of their exports haven't been able to make it to China because of what's been happening. And then we already covered previously how India, for example, has become the largest, China has become the largest trading partner of India, surpassing the US just this last year. And of course, US, we've also seen the trade war has not worked to diminish or decouple those 2 economies. So that being said, this is happening. These 4 countries have met, and soon after, we found an interesting response. This is the thing that Marco will spend a little more time talking on.
Yeah, just before that, just one quick thing is about this promise of the vaccine. Let's see how it goes. But this is also clearly like a move they're trying to do to sort of respond, especially to China efforts, because China right now like already sent tens of millions of vaccines to I think more than 50 countries now. I mean, I think it's probably they have more or less same number of vaccines outside the country than inside the country. So China is putting a lot of effort to send vaccines to, especially to developing countries. So they have this now. They said, oh, US and Japan will fund, India will produce, and Australia will distribute. But let's see, because we still don't know. It's not so clear. But I mean, it would be good. I mean, hopefully they do that because the world needs vaccines now.
Yeah.
And developed countries, they're not doing that much as they could.
This goes back to what I was saying. Also, when you have people when you have 2 powers that are strong enough, they're keeping each other accountable. So the U.S. is just making promises all the time. And then when China actually does it, if that's what pushes the U.S. to say, "Oh crap, you know, we better catch up on those promises," then great. And I think you're going to see a lot more benefit like that. But I think right now, with everything else going on, people just kind of want to smash China back down to where they were before. And it's weird, as you said, with all these countries where the majority of their trade is going to China. You know, at some point, aren't they going to stop and say, "Well, hold on a second. How does this make any sense?" You know, this is what China does for their friends. And America, at the end of the day, is always going to be America first. You know, that's what their priority is going to be. And they'll come after their allies, even when when it suits them fine, as we can see through history. But yeah, no, I mean, hopefully it does push the U.S. to send out some more vaccines and get some more product to the countries that really need it. Of course, not including the countries that they sanction and don't allow medicine to get into, though. But outside of that, I mean, hopefully China can pick up the slack over there also, because that wasn't something that was available before when you only had one superpower. When one superpower said this country is not going to get any medicine for its people, that country didn't get any medicine for its people. So this is a nice system we have here that can kind of look after those innocent people that have nothing to do with any of these geopolitics.
And I mean, it's funny that kind of ironic that, you know, China's being accused for this vaccine diplomacy as if it's like a force of evil. It's like, well, you can have sanctions and prevent medicines from entering countries, or you can send vaccines. I think now they're engaging in vaccine diplomacy, hopefully. I mean, you mentioned previously in a show about the 3M mask debacle in Canada, even for your friends that they, stopped, we're trying to threaten to close off the mask supply. Of course, this week, we also said, the US also said, oh, let's send some vaccines also to our friends in Canada. So vaccine diplomacy, maybe not a bad idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there was one guy, he was the finance minister in...
I think we lost you.
We lost your audio
okay.
for the last, after I mentioned the 3M, we kind of lost you there.
Yeah.
You kind of got garbled up. Now you're back though.
Okay. All right. Now I'm back. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Sure. What I was saying was, there was one guy in particular. I can't remember which country he was from. It wasn't Ethiopia, but it was somewhere in the region. And he had a very positive view on China trade in China. It was an honest view with the different pros and cons. But now he works at a think tank in Washington, D.C. So you can imagine how his views are moving now in order to be hired by a Washington, D.C. think tank. And he started calling it the same thing. Yeah, vaccine diplomacy in regards to China. And then when I pointed out that the think tank that he works for has constantly praised the vaccines that the USAID was kind of giving out to these different countries, I said, I find it curious that your think tank doesn't call what you're doing vaccine diplomacy, because he was getting into an argument with somebody saying there's nothing wrong with the vaccine diplomacy, and word characterization. And then so that's when I said that. And he says, yeah, we usually reserve it for other people. So, and I said, so you can see how it can be seen as a particularly derogatory term meant for other people to kind of separate us versus them. And he actually it looked like he agreed. He said, his only reply was, I see, so he didn't want to further push the envelope after that. But it's interesting. I mean, all of these different phrases like wolf warrior diplomacy when they're responding to aggression, it's the same kind of thing. I like what one of my overseas Chinese friends in the US said, that wolf warrior diplomacy is a great way to respond to rabid dog diplomacy.
Exactly.
But as soon as China stands up for itself, they've got this label that they want to give it, and it's the same thing for the vaccines. But whatever, in the case of the vaccines, at the end of the day, something good is happening, and I mean that's something we can all be happy about, even if it involves some sort of a fight at the top level. Bottom line is that the people on the ground are being helped by what's going on.
Yeah, this is what matters. And that's interesting because this you just mentioned the issue of the sanctions. This brings us to the second headline we want to bring today. After a few days of the Quad meeting, there was also like some news announcements in United Nations, because there is a new team on the block. It's actually
group of friends, as they are calling the group of friends, especially China, Russia, Venezuela, but more 14 countries now, including Cuba, Iran. As you can see, countries who are Bolivia, countries were being sanctioned by the US.
Right.
By the way, I don't know if you know that, but more or less 30% of the countries in the world right now have some sort of sanctions from US. That's the level of the situation. So they are forming this bloc, and they're very clear this is not a bloc against US, against anything, but it's actually a bloc to defend a basic thing in the United Nations, which is the Chart of Foundation of United Nations. Like, okay, let's go back to the basics, which is multilateralism, non-interference in countries' internal affairs, peaceful conflict resolution, basically no arbitrary sanctions against anyone without being discussed in the international level, which is actually what the US is doing a lot in the last years. So this group was actually formed, initially was formed in 2019, was the first initiative, came from Venezuela, but joined by China, Russia, and these other countries. And now they have a statement, and they are actually waiting to April 9th to have like a more official launch, and waiting for more countries to join. One interesting thing is that I was talking to a friend yesterday. He's like a top diplomat in Latin America, so he knows a lot this behind the scenes thing. So he was explaining me something interesting, which is, I mean, people don't realize the power of U.S. Having United Nations in New York, because they say, in these cases, even sometimes countries agree with us and have this like as a policy, is sympathetic to this policy. But you know what? The ambassador of this country lives in New York for many years. Their kids are in schools. Maybe if they quit the job in the United Nations, they still want to live in US. So they're
Right.
not actually going to be like to be they want to be seen as causing troubles in the US.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, really? Of course, Marco. How do you think this things work? I mean, imagine they control everybody. They know, they have information about everybody. Also, if you have something that, okay, not
Yeah.
so good to
If
come to
the
public, they
last
know.
weekend, last weekend you were spending your time somewhere you shouldn't have been. Yeah.
Exactly. So he was explaining me that, like, even when the country agrees, the ambassador agrees, not always they are going to go to the front line to defend some sort of a block like this. So that's the situation. So say, okay, it's
That's
yeah.
really interesting. I mean, it makes sense, and it's not something I've ever thought of. I think most people haven't ever thought of. But yeah, we'll see how this goes. I like what you said. How you pointed out specifically that they made a point to say that this isn't some sort of an alliance against the U.S., which is an important distinction. But I think they know full well that that's exactly what it's going to be painted as, even if they say that. It won't necessarily be called the axis of evil this time. It will probably be called something else. But they're going to figure out a way to do this, and it's like it's weird because people are coming out and saying, "Listen, guys, this isn't a matter of aggression; it's a matter of survival, basically." Whereas when Marco Rubio comes out and does that interparliamentary alliance on China, it's like that's the whole purpose is to basically attack China and put China back in its place. But you'll see how this is painted by the media. I think as these countries come together, watch out. We're gonna see how this is painted. That this is a dividing of the world and an alliance that's against America or that hates American freedoms or whatever it may be. They'll find something. I don't know what the catchphrase is going to be, but they'll find one.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you're saying the name, the axis of evil, I think it would be more like an axis of all those who have been screwed by imperialism, something like that.
Well, that's the truth. Yeah, they're not going to use that phrase though.
Yeah.
That one
Yeah.
that won't pass the marketing department.
We gotta maybe ask Dan for his help to figure out a better name for that.
Yeah, they'll be like, I think we need something better. I mean, it's truthful, but I don't think that's really what we're going for here.
Not so catchy. Not so catchy. Let's find something.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's true. I mean, with this point, it's like anything that will in any way challenge the unipolarity or unilateralism or the hegemony of the U.S. will be seen as countering as an axis that is as against the U.S. completely. But it's actually underdogs that have suffered, like Marco said, 30% of countries. That's a big part of the world, And this group of countries are not necessarily small countries that are feeling the brunt, not only of economic sanctions that we mentioned, but all the different tactics that hybrid war now today takes, right? It's about information war, the media war. It's through all kinds of other channels or lawfare. Brazil has experienced that. It's through many other means and the obvious. But anyways, imperialism makes many enemies, and sometimes those enemies become friends. And I think that might be one of the theme of today in terms of what has the kind of U.S. movements done for bringing its enemies slightly closer together. Because they're finding friends in each other. And I mean, we weren't going to touch too much on it, but I think it's worthwhile to also mention that while all this was happening, there was also the big Alaska meeting that just ended with Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State of the U.S., the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, then the Director of Foreign Affairs, Yang Jiechi, and then also Wang Yi, the Foreign Minister. So I wanted to just say, I mean, there's been quite a lot of news on the sparring, the diplomatic sparring that took place, but just a little quote. We don't usually bring quotes about what the Director Yang had said. And he's saying, I don't think the overwhelming majority of countries in the world would recognize that the universal values advocated by the United States or that the opinion of the United States could represent international public opinion. And those countries would not recognize that the rules made by a small number of people would serve as the basis of international order. So then, of course, the famous line also about, U.S. does not speak from a position of strength in this moment in terms of where they are at domestically, internationally, and economically. But I think this is part of this kind of block of, let's really long name the group of those who've been screwed by imperialism, is that there's a question of, can a few, can a very, very small minority determine the world order, and that there are responses to that. At some point, groups come together and say, this doesn't make sense. This world order that one country is exerting on the rest of the world cannot be necessarily supported by the rest of the world. So that was a really powerful quote. I couldn't resist bringing it in.
Yeah, it was an interesting meeting all overall. I think when Blinken went in to kind of make his point, it seemed like he wanted to put a little bit of a show on for the American people to show, oh, we're going to be tough on China. And they got a little bit of a surprise, didn't they? They didn't get their usual response when they're talking down to China as if it's someone who, deserves to be spoken down to or scolded like a child. When they came back and brought some facts saying, really now, and the nerve to talk for him, first of all, to have somebody like Blinken there saying things like, a rules-based world order, it's like this is the same guy that was behind supporting the Iraq war, supporting destabilizing all of these countries and things like that. What are you talking about? Rules based and their relationships are completely voluntary. What are you talking about? The Iraqi parliament last year voted 170-0 for you guys to leave, and you said, "Nah, we're not going." What do you mean voluntarily? It was just the weirdest thing. And then his sidekick talking about America's secret sauce. America's secret sauce is napalm and gunpowder. Like, what are you talking about? It was unbelievable. And I was glad to see, the Chinese side finally bring some of these facts to the table. And Blinken's response that, well, you know what, we're not a perfect country and we don't get it right all the time. But the important thing is we look at ourselves and we continually try to improve. Again, what are you talking about? You sanctioned the International Criminal Court when they wanted to look into your war crimes in Afghanistan. Not only did you sanction them, you sanctioned their family also. What are you talking about? Accountability and continually improving and at how you sweep this stuff under the rug, maybe. It was just like so tone deaf. It was so tone deaf. It was spectacular to see, and it's interesting to see the difference in the reaction, how the two sides, the public just thinks it went totally different from one another. You would think with this, there were a lot of people really proud, obviously, in China that finally China kind of stood up for itself and saying, no, we're equals now. We speak as equals. And a lot of people, I think, might have the tendency to think that maybe this would create a hyper nationalism in China or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it still hasn't. They're very proud, but it still hasn't gone that way. It still hasn't. I think they try to manage this very carefully. I actually did a test. There was a picture on Twitter that I said, I want to see what kind of a reaction I get to this picture when I posted it on. So I posted it on my WeChat Moments. I'll show you that picture. This one here. So I thought, you know what? I want to just. I think it's kind of funny. Bullying is never cool, but I just wanted to see what the reaction would be like. WeChat blocked it. They didn't allow anybody to see it on my moments. You try posting that photo on your WeChat moments, nobody will see it. Yeah. So they're really careful about this stuff. And a lot of people, I saw these posts of people saying, oh, because of China's COVID response and all this stuff, China's really taking advantage of it and they're becoming hyper nationalistic and it's, very scary or whatever. It's like, no, that's not really happening. There isn't this movement, and it reminds me of what Kishore Mahbubani said. If China was, of course, people are very proud here. If China was a traditional Western liberal democracy, like you kind of copied and pasted that model, then it would become a hyper nationalistic country where people will be looking for revenge. People will be, you'll have to play into that. But yeah, you're not seeing that. But it was interesting to see the responses. I'm sure. You guys are here in China too. You must have seen people were like sharing those little clips on Douyin of the exchanges. I was thinking of my kids.
T-shirts,
I was
mugs with the sentences
yeah,
of United States.
Don't interfere with the Actually, I actually want to get one of those phone cases. But I was like, I was listening to the Douyin videos when I was getting in the elevator going to a mall to pick up my kids from their class, and then somebody came out of the elevator and they looked at me listening to it, like, whoa. 你听得懂中文? And they were kind of like really happy that I was listening to that. Like, yeah, that's us, but it's still,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just like, I mean, we were discussing with some friends also like more experience in politics. They were saying, oh yeah, there's a lot of theater, of course, in this kind of situations. But because one thing is the behind the scenes, what the discussions there, like the real negotiations. But I think, especially for us in the global south, I mean, I remember I shared this with some friends, the whole transcription of the like the argument. And some of them text me like, oh, but thanks for sharing. This is so deep for us. Because people have to understand, is not when do you have like a chance to see a country like from the global south or developing, because China is like now in between, but it's still like in that moment, China representing the whole global south and say, no, guys, I'm sorry, this is your opinion. You are not representing the opinion of the majority of population of this planet. This is the opinion of the U.S. government. It's not even the opinion of the people of the United States. So please tone down, because you're not gonna. And it was something, I don't know, but not normal, I guess. I don't know if you saw Yang Jiechi. He was like doing this. He was pointing to blinking, which is not a common thing for like a Chinese protocol. But I think it was like a very special, deep moment. And I think this in the whole global south, this resonated like very strongly as a message.
You imagine that he is finally saying what so many countries in the global south would love to say to the U.S., but at the same time, they don't want to be the reason that 30% increases when they join the sanctioned list. It's like now there's somebody who can't be bullied the same way that we can be bullied, saying something that we've wanted to say for the last 30 years as they've been overthrowing our governments and organizing coups and uprisings and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that must have been quite, and that could be something that gets some of these countries to think a little bit more and rally behind this new alliance, which again isn't to go against the U.S., but just for a matter of survival. Because I think a lot of these countries, even who may be on friendly terms with the U.S. right now, knows that could change at any point in time if they don't play ball exactly how the U.S. wants them to play ball.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So talking about this special corporations outside of U.S. Western powers, there was an interesting headline last few days. It's actually for me it's very exciting. This is sort of like science fiction kind of stuff. I was also reminding you comment last week, we were talking about rare earth, and it's like, I think I saw this in Star Trek. So let's talk about a little bit about a real Star Trek now, which is a new announcement of the partnership between China and Russia to build and operate the International Scientific Lunar Station. This is something, it's really amazing. We're going to talk more about China and Russia. This is actually one of the things we want to bring more today. But just to start, this is actually a great project. First of all, we have to remember that China did like a great accomplishment especially in the last years in its spatial projects. First of all, remember
Far Side of the Moon.
Exactly, Far Side of the Moon, first time ever in history. Then also China brought samples from the moon, from like rocks and dust from the moon. This is the first time in 40 years that a country does this. So this for scientific research is critical. And China is the third actually country who did that. Like, of course, US, Soviet Union, and now China was able to do such an operation. And also, the Mars mission. Actually, the Tianwen, which is the name of the what is it called, the
rover.
Rover and the orbiter.
Exactly. Sorry, my English sometimes fails a little bit.
Yeah, no.
Which this is, by the way, it's so beautiful because for those who doesn't know, Tianwen in Chinese it means heavenly questions. So this is how they name the space craft who are going to Mars. It's about, I mean, they're probably touching the ground on Mars in May or June, but this is also a great accomplishment to China. So in this process, China, it was already planning to have this lunar station, and I think it was a big deal that now they're going to cooperate with Russia, because we know that Russia has like big history and on that technology, knowledge about the space operations, but it's also geopolitically, it's a very important partnership again. So this the main goals are mostly scientific and economic. Why to build a lunar station? So in terms of economic potential, it's also huge. They're expecting that by 2050, more or less $10 trillion of having revenue are coming from lunar operations, especially with water ice that they are finding in the moon, and this can become a so-called a lunar propellant, which means this can, of course, you get the water, you get oxygen, you get hydrogen, so you can either have oxygen for human beings to be there, but also as fuel.
Fuel. Oh no!
Yeah,
oh
exactly.
no!
Exactly.
So the next American rovers are going to have guns equipped on them.
Yeah.
As soon as there's fuel. Oh no! We'll see what happens.
And plus solar power, and plus, guess what? Rare earth. You can also find rare earth in the moon, and things like
I think we gotta do one of these.
So they are planning to have the station. They're still deciding if it's going to be orbit and in the surface, but they are planning around 2031 to have some operations. It's also interesting geopolitically because Russia and US, they have been cooperating for many years in the ISS, International Space Station.
Yeah, China was blocked from it. Yeah.
Since 2011, China is legally, it's like constitutionally blocked in the US. But what happened, of course, in the last years, the relationship between Russia and US it's just getting worse by the hour. And also the criticism that both Russia and China does to US, because US also has a project, of course, to do the same. It's called Artemis. It's actually a huge project as well. But the main criticism from both Russia and China is that there's too much space for private companies. And they actually accusing US to allow the privatization of the space, of the moon, and of the operations in the space. So this is what China and Russia wants to avoid. They don't want the private companies to control these operations. And I mean, I think it's a good point, because even like the potential for the space exploration based on the moon, it's also that you can launch some rockets, some what is it called? Some spacecraft from the moon is much better, of course, than to launch from the Earth, because it's 20 times more efficient because of the gravity, the super low gravity. So the potential to have a moon as a base, and now we're becoming like very sci-fi kind of discussion, but it's becoming reality. But I think the most important thing about this is, again, the partnership between China and Russia. This is, I think, this is for the world. It's very very important, and we expect that at least they also saying that this project is going to be open for many other countries to join, which is also something that it might be a potential interesting thing to countries from the global south, or the countries who wants also to develop space technology and so on.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, on one hand, it's amazing to see these partnerships go on. I mean, the U.S. political system has got itself in this situation where the way that their system works is pushing these countries together even more so than if they just left it to naturally occur. You know, the Republicans, their biggest monster and boogeyman that they wanted to paint was China. And for the Democrats, they wanted to paint Russia, you know, Russiagate and all of these kinds of things. And then you have the dilemma also is, you know, after Joe Biden gets into power, he needs to prove that all those things they said about him and China, that he'd go soft on China, are false. And it just creates the situation where they can't even do what they did before, where they kind of, you know, buddied up with either Russia or China and just try to divide the world by at least having a few allies. But you know they don't have that here, and now they're going to accomplish some pretty good things together. Again, maybe the net result in the end is a net positive, because it sounds like, as you said, it's going to be a little bit more open source, bringing some opportunities to the global South to join in. And yeah, hopefully it doesn't result in Star Wars, but you know, we can still hope for the best.
This is actually just one quick comment. This is also one of the criticisms of Russia, especially that's why Russia quit the cooperation with the U.S. in this lunar station, is that also U.S. is also setting a sort of like a space military operations. And what Russia was saying, no, we shouldn't allow that. This is not the purpose of lunar or space exploration is not to set a military scheme or military forces, as U.S. is already organized. So again, this is, I mean,
yeah, I thought there was. I don't know. I can't remember if there was any specific agreements, but I always thought that there was an understanding that there wasn't going to be a militarization of space. So that is that doesn't sound very good. I mean, being able to launch attacks on wherever they want from space. I don't think that's something the U.S. should do. It's not something China should do. I really hope we don't go down that path, but for some reason, I feel like there's probably a likelihood of that happening.
I mean, I think just back to the point you just said, you're, that the moves of the U.S. Aggression, let's call it, has forced the hand or maybe accelerated cooperation that might not have happened as quickly before. I mean, just 2 days, I guess 2 or 3 days after the Alaska meeting, guess who's in town? Well, in the other town. We're in Shanghai, they're in Beijing, but the foreign minister Sergei Lavrov is now visiting here for high-level talks. You
Russian.
know, Russian. So let's see what comes of that. But this is, you know, these things are moving probably at a faster pace than would have previously, if not been provoked in that sense. And I think it's it goes, you know, to give a little more context in this China-Russia cooperation that's been deepening over the last years, is that they've also, not only we mentioned, you know, sanctions and the similar types of strategies that have been used against Russia for even a longer period than China, you know, especially around encirclement. With Russia, it's primarily through the NATO and ways of how to foment and upheaval and in and around Russia. The tipping point being in 2014 in Ukraine and shift of Putin's foreign policy towards the east, let's say. But also now what we're seeing with Quad and the encirclement of China. These are very similar strategies that have been used against both. So it makes sense that they're kind of forming alliances that are deepening. And if in some ways, it's probably the strongest alliance in over 60 years, since really the Sino-Soviet split in around 1961. But of course, we know it was already happening in the 1950s. And what's interesting too, a survey just came out a few days ago. This kind of forming of friendship between Russia and China is not only at the diplomatic high state-to-state level, it's also at the kind of public opinion level. So a survey released, it was a joint U.S. Like our Chicago-Moscow survey, looking between the time of August 2020 to February 2021. So really over this period of the deepening of the relationship, that 74% of Russians have a favorable view of China, and 39% of the U.S. So we're also seeing on the kind of public sentiment level that friendship, let's say, is deepening as well. And we've seen different areas, I think, of where this cooperation has continually developed. Marco, do you want to come in with something?
No, it's just like a one thing that is just from a historical point of view, because you just mentioned interesting things like, oh, it's probably the best relationship that China and Russia has since the Sino-Soviet split in '61. And it's also interesting to think that it's what's happening now. It's almost like the opposite what happened in the early '70s regarding this triangle: U.S., China, and Russia. Because remember, the so-called rapprochement between U.S. and China was also a way to create more divisions between Soviet Union and China as the two major communist countries in that moment. So U.S. was actually very clever to bring China closer and like, okay, so let's put like an edge in this relationship. But actually, what the U.S. has been doing in the last years, first, of course, with Russia, but now with China, it's actually they are unifying China and Russia as maybe ever before. So this is curious because, I mean, as you said, also the encirclement strategy, it's that they did with Russia. I mean, after the fall of Soviet Union and creating tensions in the countries in the margins of Russia. I don't know if you have the image of the bases, the U.S. military bases in Asia. I mean, this is crazy. I mean,
yeah. I mean, what is China thinking, putting their country so close to all of these American bases?
Exactly. They are so invasive. You see how Chinese, my God, they are just.
I mean, this is the point. Like, I mean, one of the areas of cooperation we want to talk about is this, right? Like, when you actually talk about military bases, you know, U.S. has anywhere between, I think, 800 to 1,000 military bases in operation, naval fleets, etc. China has the one in Djibouti. And you have, I think, in terms of what I was looking up today, around 400 that have some relationship with and around China, with missiles, with bombers, with warships, with nuclear weapons as well. And so you would say now with this kind of strategic cooperation, we know that Russia, militarily, has advances that are way beyond China's capacity. So you want a friend that could possibly hook you up with a defense missiles, because look at that map. That's if that's not encircled, it's really scary. You would want a defensive. You want to be able to say, if they shoot missiles at us, we can defend ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
I would really, in terms of China's military aggression, I would really challenge someone to say, what kind of map can you produce in terms of what is China's, military foreign policy? It's like, it has one base in Djibouti.
Oh, if they even thought about it, if they even thought about putting something in Latin America, that'd be almost a declaration of war, let alone actually physically encircling the U.S. like that. I mean, yeah, I mean,
they actually have a cooperation with Argentina. It's like a sort of it's a platform for launching rockets to the satellites, this kind of things. But yeah, imagine if it was like a real
defense,
like,
or yeah.
It would be
not even if it was an assault weapon of some sort, even if it was a defense weapon of some sort. I think there would be anything connected with the military. There'd be some serious issues and consequences.
Yeah.
But
so the truth is that at this point, it's hard to think about a better match in the world than China and Russia. They are almost like they were made to each other.
Maybe you have that birthday cake image.
Yeah, I mean. You can see the vibe. That's the vibe in the last years between the best friends. I mean, Xi said this. President Xi said in 2019, Putin is my best friend. And
this is a birthday that Putin. It's written with some sort of candy on it for President for Xi Jinping's 66th birthday.
Yeah, he was visiting Russia, and it actually was a surprise. I mean, at least this is how the media covered as a surprise. She was not expecting to have a cake, etc. But that's the vibe. But of course, it's huge interests that match together. Of course,
yeah. Well,
Russia
has. Yeah. No, I was going to say at the Alaska event, they did have. I don't know who prepared it, but I know the Chinese leaders, they had instant noodles. So. There's that. I don't know if you saw that video when they were asking, "What did you eat?"
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and he's walking out. He's like, instant noodles. I mean, it was probably his own choice, but I thought it was kind of funny.
Young JT, yeah, young JT. This is how US treats his guests. But anyway,
But,
but then
yeah, I just want to clarify too. The minister that's visiting China, that was after Biden called Putin a murderer, right?
yes, exactly. Actually, this is something like it's. I mean, it's the level of aggressiveness is it's in
Hypocritical.
Hypocritical.
Hypocrisy.
Yeah, hypocrisy. That's when it's really big. That should be a new word. Hypocrisy. When it's just so big that you've got a guy who's voted for almost every single war, calling somebody else a murderer.
Yeah.
That is my new word of the day: hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy. Thanks for your support for my bad English. But anyway,
no, hypocrisy. Hypocrisy isn't a real word, but I'm saying it should be. It's like a hippopotamus-sized.
No, I know.
Hippopotamus-sized hypocrisy.
Yeah, he did that. He called Putin a murder. Putin gave like a very good answer. It's also online. You can see YouTube, etc. Basically, you guys, you killed millions of indigenous people, then you enslaved millions of African people, and then still today, black people are exterminated. This is Putin saying. Still today, black people is exterminated in your country, and you guys talking about murder. I don't think it's a good word for you guys to use. Anyway,
not even talking about his foreign policy.
Exactly, just not even talking about exactly. But then he called back the Russian ambassador in the U.S. This is like a diplomatic move. When you're angry with the country, you officially call your ambassador back for consultation. So right now, the ambassador is in U.S. The Russian ambassador in U.S. is right now in Moscow for consultations. And then you have Lavrov's visit. But why is that? Because, let's think about one moment. Like, Russia has a few things that are critical for China. First of all, as Tings just said, military. They need to defend themselves. And Russia is the biggest military power in the world. Is even more than US. US has more quantity, but in terms of technology, everybody knows that Russia is way ahead of US. Russia has huge amounts of natural resources that is needed for China's development. And Russia also has very important technology background, like, for instance, the space technology. They have great mathematicians, great physicians, engineers. We know that. So this is one side. The other side is China. China has all the economical power, industries, technology. The BRI, which also Russia is part of the BRI project. So they actually fits perfectly together. So there was an editorial from Global Times yesterday in the middle of all these disputes in the last days, literally saying China-Russia cooperation has no upper limits, and this is what it's becoming. It's clear, and again, this is a very important partnership for the Global South as a whole. It's not only in the BRICS, but also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're also in BRI. So this is probably the most important geopolitical issue of 21st century so far. Is this rapprochement between reapproachment between China and Russia?
It was funny. Just late last night, the editorial GT came out, but it's very similar to things we've been hearing. Like last year at the Valdai Club, which is it's an annual international conference on foreign affairs that led by the Russia state-backed think tank called Valdai. When Putin was asked, what is there going to be a military alliance? Like, what is the prospects for the China and Russia alliance? He's also said something similar. It's possible to imagine anything. But at the same time, he said, the level of cooperation and trust is so deep at this point that it wouldn't be necessary to formalize anything, but it is possible to imagine anything. So the sky is the upper limits is the kind of feel right now.
I think people need to be kept on alert also, though, like both the public and the leaders, that I think when the US realizes this kind of intelligence mistake that they've made with their approach, they'll try to find some sort of a way to create a wedge again. I don't know when it will be, but I think they're going to start. I mean, somebody must be paying attention and saying, we got a problem on our hands. We used to be really good at this divide and conquer stuff, and now we're really good at getting people to rally together.
Exactly.
Groups of friends.
Uniting and rallying.
Birthday cakes and groups of friends.
Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah, they've lost the plot.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, just a few examples for us to have more concrete. What is, for instance, in terms of natural resources, how important Russia is to China. So, in terms of there's many new projects going on in the last year or so, and factories being built, plants being built. For instance, in coal, there's a joint venture between Ilgagol from Russia and Fujian Guohang Ocean Shipping. This project is expected to ship 30 millions of tons of coal to China in 2023, which is now it will double the current amount that Russia exports to China. It was 33 million in 2019. So this is going to be like a big deal. But guess what? Who is right now the major exporter of coal to China? Australia.
Myanmar is Australia. Oh, okay, yeah. Myanmar is the LPG or whatever it is. The
exactly. So it's Australia. So I mean, Australia is speaking its side, and of course China is going to have options, and Russia is becoming an option. About a quarter of China's imports in 2019 came from Australia, and now they're shifting to Russia.
One of the things I keep hearing about that argument is with Australia's coal, which they supply a lot to China, is Australia has a level of quality in their coal that's really unmatched anywhere else. I'm not sure if the Russian coal is going to be as good, or it
is also. I mean, it's true that Australia is really, for instance, this year China actually they raised imports from Mongolia, for instance. But that is not as good as the Australian one. But this one from Russia is also high quality. Brazil also has high quality one. Brazil is also could be an option also in the next years. But of course, it's far and it's more complicated. But then you go to natural gas, is the same. They are building this huge pipelines complex called the Power of Siberia. It's going to supply China with 38 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually. But just to have an idea, right now, China imports 90 billion. So it's only this Power of Siberia is almost the half of the whole imports of China right now. And guess what? Australia is also one of the countries that supplies, plus, of course, Myanmar, Asian countries, and Qatar. And finally, with oil, Russia became last year the second biggest exporter of oil to China, just behind Saudi Arabia. But there's a small difference. Russia is 83.5 million, and Saudi Arabia is 84.9 million tons of oil. So in terms of natural resources, it's clear the strategic position to Russia regarding China and how much China needs Russia. And if you go to trade, it's the same. Trade, it's more than 100 billion US dollars last year. It was, I mean, China is, it's the biggest, what is it called again in English? Like the
trade,
imports and exports. How do you say that, the sentence?
Like the trade total?
Yeah, no. It's actually, I mean, China, most of the Russia imports come from China. Most of Russia exports go to China. So this is like a really a strategic also partnership in terms of trade. And they are planning to double this trade, more or less double by 2024. They expect it to reach $200 billion of trade a year in 3 years from now. Right, and finally, the last thing, just like to finish this point, is we also mentioned this like a few weeks ago in this show, but is this issue of de-dollarization of the trade. China and Russia they are also the most advanced non-dollarized trade in the world. Like more or less half of the trade between China and Russia is not made with US dollars, but with rubles and yuan. So this is also, as we discussed already, you're not bringing back this again, but this is, we know how critical is to keep dollar in international trade, and they are moving ahead on this too.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Also, I mean, the point that people need to understand also is that this divergence from the U.S. and these coalitions are very different from the coalitions that that typically Western powers forge with the purpose of containing some sort of an issue or containing some sort of a country or group of countries or region. This is simply about de-risking themselves because they've seen what kinds of risks are involved with relying too much on the U.S. and the U.S. dollar, which has been weaponized for many, many years. It's interesting to hear the developments about the oil sector also. I mean, obviously, Xinjiang is going to be an important place for that. And there's actually something I haven't written about it yet. This is the first time this breaking news here, but there, do you remember? Did you see how there was anti-Asian racism rallies in the U.S.? Then there was a group with East Turkestan flags showing up, kind of heckling them and honking and stuff like that. They were counter protesting, saying, "Don't forget the genocide." Obviously with their propaganda from the U.S. Drowning out the people who are protesting against anti-Asian violence. And it's like, and people are saying, "Oh, don't conflate the two. We can talk about this, but it's got nothing to do with Asian violence." Well, then why would you try to drown these people out when they're talking about this? But one of the people who was driving one of the cars, I'm not going to say who it is. I'm going to probably post it before this video is posted. They were driving a vehicle that wasn't theirs. They are funded by this person's funded by the NED. They push this Xinjiang narrative. And I looked up the license plate, and it is owned by an executive at the National Petroleum Council, which is the biggest kind of lobbying group for big oil in the US. And they've written articles on Xinjiang and the ethnic tensions and stuff like that. So now one of these Uyghur activists is directly connected to this National Petroleum Council, driving their luxury SUV, counter protesting against the anti-Asian protests. It was, you'll see a little bit more of it on Twitter, but I think, when oil and when money and when all this kind of stuff is involved, that's when, the U.S. goes into hyper, overdrive with this kind of stuff. And maybe it's why they're making all of these blunders also, making these strategic mistakes, is because they're in a bit of a panic with what's going on. I think obviously Donald Trump helped to speed things up by kind of not necessarily creating a problem, but exposing the truth a little bit too transparently. He didn't know how to self-censor. When he was going into Syria, he said, I think we talked about this last time. He says, "We're coming for the oil. We're taking the oil. We like oil." And it's like, no. You're not supposed to say those bits out loud, buddy.
Yeah, there was, I don't know if you saw, I think it was like 2 years ago, also Trump, it's like a public meeting, and Trump was saying, "Oh, I've heard that Venezuela has the biggest oil reserve in the world. Why we are not there?"
Yeah,
it's there on YouTube. It's just, why we're not there?
Yeah.
They don't hide.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I mean, the other ones hide. The other ones hide better. The Democrats are really good.
Exactly.
Painting rainbow flags on the side of the, and BLM on the sides of their drones before they strike people.
Yeah, they're rainbow colored missiles, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe the last point. I know we're getting close to the hour here. That we want to say of like the Russia-China cooperation, and maybe one of the interesting developments and consequences, specifically on the sanctions that we've seen on Huawei and other Chinese telecoms, is that in the last few years, it's actually the Russian market that has grown the most for Huawei, averaging 51% a year since 2014. So this is like a series of partnerships. Some are research, some are about production, others are acquisitions, mainly to grow the 5G market there. But it's also not just about accessing the Russian market. There's a couple of elements that Russia offers China. And the first is being talent, like we mentioned, in terms of the scientists, engineers, developers. It's something that China is needing. So when the sanctions came, both actually in the US and in Australia, what was happening is that the CEO, Ren Zhengfei, basically pulled 1,000 from Australia, 1,000 R&D staff, from which is 80%. So they pulled pretty much the majority of their funding, $100 billion, plus 1,000 of their staff. And then similarly did that with the US. And then what did they do? They actually tripled their R&D investment in Russia, and now are in the midst of going to 5 research facilities, training 50,000 Russian technicians. So they basically just said, okay, you're closing up our shops here. Let's do a huge investment in Russia that can actually offer the talent, the people who can build their apps, the engineers that can build the infrastructure. There's that one aspect. And then there's the second aspect is because of the sanctions, Huawei and other Chinese companies are really trying to figure out how to develop operating systems that are an alternative to the Google run ones or Android run ones. So there's two kind of main cooperations. Is one with the majority state-owned Rostelecom. They have their own system called the Aurora operating system, Aurora OS. And also, it's actually Russian engineers that helped develop the Huawei's Harmony operating system. So operating system side, they've been collaborating to try to, confront or try to find a solution to the sanctions on Android and Google, or access to these technologies. And then beyond all that is actually, once you have the system, you need the whole ecosystem of apps, and to be developed so that these are fully functioning systems. So Russia's been playing a huge part for Huawei. Of course, lots of development beyond just cell phones and operating systems. There's going to be, we'll be seeing, in the next few years, a huge advance in the technological and high-tech telecoms collaboration as well. So that's one of the consequences we've seen in the sanctions.
Yeah, that's going to be that's interesting. I really hope that there are some alternative operating systems. That's the tricky one to do, though, is the ecosystem of the apps and things like that. That was one of the big failures of BlackBerry Research in Motion, when everybody was kind of getting on board with these apps and things like that, and they just kept their system closed. And then later on, towards the end, Research in Motion, BlackBerry had some sort of a way so that you could run Android apps on their system. I can't remember if it was select apps, but by that time it was already too late. So that'll be the big challenge. It'll be interesting to see what happens. All right, so I think that was your last story, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I want to wrap up with one thing I want to say to clarify. In the beginning, our first few episodes, we weren't going to talk about the U.S. Imperialism too much directly, but we're kind of on the same wavelength with this kind of stuff, and I think it's important. But some of the people who are watching, maybe from the U.S., who perceive it as being anti-American, it's not about that. It's the government. I think. Although the people vote the government in power, it doesn't matter who you vote for; you get the same thing. And there's a lot of Americans who see through it as well. This is not like we are, Canadians and from Brazil and from anywhere else outside, kind of speaking about the U.S. There's a lot of great people in the U.S. speaking about it also. And then the absence of being able to having anybody you can vote for who's going to actually make any difference. The least you can do is educate yourself about this stuff. Don't get your backs up when we're talking about this stuff, about the evil American empire, because it's going to take people. It's going to take ordinary Americans who either don't know what to do or don't realize what's going on. Just more people need to wake up in order for something to change. That's one of the main ways they manage to kind of keep this kind of a thing going, is just by keeping everybody asleep. So hopefully these kinds of candid conversations wake people up a bit. But I just wanted to clarify that point. Yeah. Did I cut out there my little final monologue?
Chak,
can you guys still hear me? You see what happened? I was having a heartfelt conversation.
Yeah.
Viewers. All of a sudden, something funky started going on there.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy. This happens all the time with many people.
Yeah. You guys can talk amongst yourself, and you can talk to your tankies if you want, but don't talk to the American people like that.
Exactly. Don't educate our people. We're not going to allow you to do that.
Anyways, I
Do you
hope
think it's a problem with recording?
the recording, I don't know, we'll see if it comes out, but just in case I was too choppy there for everybody, the essential thing is this isn't about anti-Americanism. It's about the behavior of the US government, no matter what kind of administration is in power. It's beyond the control of the average person. The best thing the average person can do is educate themselves about this stuff. I mean, America's a brilliant country. It's a beautiful country. They used to be at the top of their game. And then slowly, as you know, money obviously especially entered politics, it became something totally different, totally unrecognizable. And you know, I hope it changes for the better. It's a beautiful country too. Spent a lot of time in the US. But yeah, I didn't have too many comments like that. I think most people understand where we're coming from, but there were a few people who said, you know, I'm an American viewer. You know, can you make a distinction between the American government and the American people? We're not all like that, and I think it's important to make that point really clear. Also,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, guys. Well, another great episode, and last time we were 1 hour 6 minutes. We are doing what we do every time, slowly bumping it up. We're 1 hour 7 minutes. I don't know if by the time I cut out some of those little bits, we're still, you know, it's still going up. Yeah.
All right, guys. I hope the average minutes is also going up. Otherwise, we have to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But anyways, thanks again for a really good episode, and I'll see you guys again next week.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.